The man, covered in trail dust, stood on the porch of the general store in Salt Lake City, Utah Territory, watching a figure stumble down the muddy street, and he couldn't tell if it was human or some creature dragged from the earth itself. It was early spring in 1876, and the recent rains had turned everything into a brown morass that sucked at boots and wagon wheels alike. The figure lurched closer, and Thomas Morrison realized with a start that beneath all that mud was a woman, her dress so caked with filth it had become a second skin. She collapsed against a hitching post near where he stood, breathing hard, her face barely visible through the layers of dried and wet mud that covered her from head to toe. Only her eyes showed clearly, pale green and filled with a desperation that made Thomas's chest tighten with something he hadn't felt in the 3 years since his wife had died of fever. "You all right, miss?" he called out, setting down the bag of supplies he'd just purchased. The woman's head turned slowly toward him, and he saw her lips moving beneath the mud. No sound came out at first, then she managed a hoarse whisper. "Water." Thomas was down the steps in an instant, pulling his canteen from his belt. He used his bandana to wipe some of the mud from around her mouth before tilting the canteen to her lips. She drank greedily, some of the water spilling down her chin and carving clean rivulets through the filth. "Thank you," she managed, her voice gaining strength. "Thank you so much." "What happened to you?" Thomas asked, crouching beside her. Up close, he could see she was young, probably in her early 20s, with dark hair matted against her skull. "My wagon overturned about 5 miles back," she said, catching her breath between words. "The wheel hit a rock in the mud and the whole thing went over into a ravine. I was thrown clear, landed in the worst of it. My horse bolted. Everything I owned was in that wagon." Thomas looked at her more carefully. Despite the mud and obvious exhaustion, there was a strength in how she held herself, a determination in those green eyes that spoke of someone who didn't give up easily. "You walked 5 miles like that?" "Didn't have much choice," she said, attempting a smile that cracked some of the mud on her cheeks. "Name's Temperance Miller. Most people call me Temp." "Thomas Morrison," he replied, offering his hand before realizing how foolish that was given her condition. "Folks call me Tom." Temp looked at his outstretched hand and laughed, a sound that surprised them both. "I appreciate the gesture, but I think I'd just make you as filthy as I am." Tom found himself smiling, the first genuine smile he'd felt in months. "Come on, let's get you somewhere you can clean up. The boarding house has a bathhouse out back." "I don't have any money," Temp said quietly, and Tom saw shame flash across what he could see of her face. "Lost everything in that wagon. I was coming here to start fresh, work as a seamstress, but all my tools, my fabric, my saved wages, it's all gone." Tom stood, making a decision that felt both reckless and absolutely right. "I've got a ranch about an hour's ride from here. Nothing fancy, just me and more work than one man can handle. Place has gone to seed since my wife passed. I could use help and you need work. Room and board plus wages." Temp stared up at him, those green eyes searching his face for any sign of impropriety or danger. Tom held her gaze steadily, letting her see whatever she needed to see. "What kind of help?" she asked carefully. "Honest work," Tom said firmly. "Cooking, cleaning, mending, whatever you're able. The house is falling apart, the yard's overgrown, and I've been living like an animal for too long. I won't lie, it's hard work, but I'm offering fair wages and respect. Nothing more, nothing less." Something in his tone must have convinced her, because Temp nodded slowly. "All right, Mr. Morrison, I accept your offer, but first, I really do need to get cleaned up." Tom helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed. He paid for her bath and a hot meal at the boarding house, then waited on the porch while she spent the better part of 2 hours scrubbing away the layers of mud. When she finally emerged, he barely recognized her. Temp Miller was beautiful, not in the delicate, fragile way his late wife Sarah had been, but with a sturdy, practical beauty that spoke of resilience. Her dark brown hair, still damp, hung past her shoulders in waves. She wore a simple dress borrowed from the boarding house keeper, pale blue and slightly too large, but clean. Her face was angular with high cheekbones and a determined chin. She looked tired but no longer defeated. "Better?" she asked, a hint of self-consciousness in her voice. "Much," Tom said, then cleared his throat, suddenly aware he'd been staring. "We should head out if we want to make it before dark. I've got an extra horse you can ride." The journey to his ranch took them through rolling hills still green from the spring rains. Tom found himself talking more than he had in months, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the area. Temp listened attentively, asking intelligent questions about the land and the livestock. "How many head of cattle do you run?" she asked as they crested a hill. "Got about 200 right now, should be more, but I've been too busy just keeping things from falling apart to properly manage the breeding. Lost some to rustlers last year too." "Are rustlers common around here?" "Common enough," Tom admitted, though most of the real trouble moved south or got caught. Still, a man alone is an easier target than he'd like to be. When the ranch came into view as the sun touched the horizon, Tom saw it through fresh eyes and felt a wave of embarrassment. The main house, once a source of pride, looked worn and weathered. Shutters hung crooked, the porch sagged on one side, and weeds had overtaken what used to be Sarah's flower garden. The barn needed paint, and the fences showed obvious signs of disrepair. "It's worse than I thought when I see it through someone else's eyes," Tom said quietly. "I've just been trying to survive, I guess. Forgot about living." Temp studied the property for a long moment. "I've seen worse," she said finally. "At least the bones are good. Everything else can be fixed with time and work." They dismounted at the barn, and Tom showed Temp where to stable her horse. Inside, at least, he'd kept things orderly. The animals were well cared for, the stalls clean, the tack properly maintained. "You take good care of your animals," Temp observed. "They depend on me," Tom said simply. "Can't let them down just because I'm feeling sorry for myself." The house interior was another matter. Tom lit a lamp and watched Temp take in the cluttered main room. Dirty dishes were piled in the kitchen area. Clothes lay scattered across chairs, and a thick layer of dust covered every surface. The fireplace was choked with old ashes, and the windows were so grimy they barely let in light. "I'll show you to the spare room," Tom said, feeling his face heat with shame. "It's probably the cleanest room in the house. Sarah used to keep it ready for guests we never had." He led her down a short hallway to a small bedroom. True to his word, it was tidy, with a simple bed covered in a faded quilt, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and a small dresser. The window looked out toward the mountains in the distance. "It's perfect," Temp said, and she sounded like she meant it. "Thank you, Tom." He nodded, backing toward the door. "I'll leave you to rest. We can talk about wages and duties in the morning. There's water in the pitcher, and I'll fix us some supper shortly." "Let me help," Temp offered. "I've been riding all afternoon. I'd rather keep moving." Together, they prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread, working around each other in the cluttered kitchen. Tom found himself acutely aware of her presence, the way she moved efficiently despite the unfamiliar space, the soft sound of her humming while she worked. They ate in companionable silence, both too tired and too aware of being strangers to force conversation. After supper, Temp insisted on washing the dishes, and Tom didn't have the energy to argue. He showed her where things were kept, then excused himself to check on the animals one final time. Standing in the barn, breathing in the familiar scent of hay and horses, Tom wondered what he'd gotten himself into. He'd acted on impulse, something he never did. But there had been something about Temp, muddy and desperate but not broken, that had called to a part of him he thought had died with Sarah. That night, lying in his bed in the room he used to share with his wife, Tom stared at the ceiling and listened to the quiet sounds of another person in his home. It felt strange and comforting in equal measure. For the first time in 3 years, the house didn't feel quite so empty. Morning came with the crow of his rooster, and Tom was up with the sun as always. He was surprised to find Temp already awake, dressed in the borrowed dress, her hair pulled back in a practical bun. She'd already stoked the fire and had coffee brewing. "You're up early," he said, accepting the cup she offered him. "Old habit," Temp replied. "My father ran a farm in Missouri. Everyone was up before dawn." "What brought you west?" Tom asked, then immediately regretted the question when he saw her face close slightly. "Same as most people, I suppose," she said after a moment. "Looking for something new. My parents both passed 2 years ago. Fever took them within days of each other. Stayed with my brother and his wife for a while, but 3 adults in a small house makes for tension. Thought I'd strike out on my own, make my own way." "I'm sorry about your parents," Tom said. "Thank you." Temp took a sip of her coffee. "What about you? You mentioned your wife passed 3 years ago, come June. Fever got her too. One day she was fine, 3 days later she was gone." "We'd only been married 2 years. Tom found himself talking more than he intended. "Afterward, I just worked, kept moving, kept busy, didn't pay attention to anything else." "And now?" Temp asked gently. "Now I've got a woman covered in mud making me realize just how far I've let everything fall apart," Tom said with a rueful smile. Temp laughed. "Well, let's see what we can do about that. Where should I start?" Over the next few days, Temp transformed the house. Tom watched in amazement as she attacked years of neglect with a determination that was almost frightening. She scrubbed floors until they gleamed, washed windows until they sparkled, organized the chaos of his kitchen and main room into something resembling order. She mended his clothes, patched holes in the curtains, and somehow coaxed Sarah's old flower garden back to life. Tom found himself staying closer to the house than usual, telling himself he needed to fix the porch or mend the fence nearby, but really just wanting to be near. They fell into an easy rhythm of working side by side, talking about everything and nothing. Temp had a quick wit and a tendency to sing while she worked, old songs Tom half remembered from his childhood. One afternoon, about a week after she'd arrived, Tom was replacing boards on the porch while Temp hung laundry to dry. The spring sun was warm, and Tom had removed his shirt, working in just his undershirt. He looked up to find Temp watching him, a strange expression on her face. "What?" he asked, self-conscious. Temp blinked, seeming to realize she'd been staring. "Nothing, sorry. Just thinking how different this place looks already. You can actually see what it's meant to be now." "That's all you, not me," Tom said. "I don't know how you've done so much in just a week." "Because I have help," Temp said, walking closer. She sat on the porch step near where he was working. "You fixed the shutters, repaired the barn door, mended half the fence line. We're doing it together." Tom met her eyes and felt something shift between them, something that had been building all week but neither had acknowledged. "Temp." A sound of approaching horses interrupted whatever he'd been about to say. Tom stood, shading his eyes against the sun. 3 riders were coming up the road to his ranch, and he didn't recognize them. "Get inside," he said quietly to Temp. "Who are they?" "Don't know. Just please go inside." Temp hesitated, then nodded and slipped into the house. Tom watched her go, then turned to face the approaching riders, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. The three men who rode into his yard were rough-looking, unshaven and trail-worn. The leader was a big man with a scar running down his left cheek. He pulled his horse to a stop and looked around the property with calculating eyes. "Help you gentlemen?" Tom asked, keeping his voice neutral. "Saw smoke from your chimney," the scarred man said. "Been riding all morning. Wondered if we might trouble you for some water for the horses and maybe a meal if you could spare it." Something about the way he said it, the way his companions were eyeing the barn and house, made Tom's instincts scream danger. But refusing hospitality outright could provoke trouble. "Water's free for the asking," Tom said. "Trough's over there. As for food, I'm afraid I can't spare much. Been a lean season." "That's so." The scarred man's eyes fixed on the house. "Saw you had help. Pretty thing hanging laundry. Could probably spare something with two of you here." Tom's jaw tightened. "The lady works for me, and she's got enough to do without feeding strangers. You're welcome to water your horses and be on your way." The tension in the yard grew thick. The scarred man looked at Tom for a long moment, clearly weighing his options. Tom stood his ground, hand near his weapon, heart pounding but face calm. Finally, the man smiled, showing yellowed teeth. "No offense meant, friend. Water's appreciated." The three men dismounted and led their horses to the trough. Tom didn't move from his position, watching them carefully. They took their time watering their horses, looking around with obvious interest. Tom noticed one of them paying particular attention to the barn, likely calculating what might be inside worth stealing. "You run this place alone?" the scarred man asked, making conversation as his horse drank. "Me and some hired hands," Tom lied smoothly. "They're up checking the north pasture, should be back soon." It was a transparent bluff, but it served its purpose. The scarred man's eyes narrowed slightly, doing his own calculation. After a moment, he nodded. "Much obliged for the water," he said, mounting up. His companions followed suit. "Might see you around." "Might," Tom said noncommittally. He watched them ride away, not relaxing until they were out of sight over the hill. Even then, he stood watching for another 10 minutes before returning to the house. Temp was standing just inside the door, holding Sarah's old rifle. "I found this in the bedroom closet," she said. "Wasn't sure if you'd need help." Tom took the rifle, surprised and impressed. "You know how to use this. My father taught me. I'm not an expert, but I can hit what I aim at." Tom nodded slowly, seeing her in a new light. "Those men were trouble. They might come back." "Then we'll be ready," Temp said simply. They were more cautious after that. Tom made sure all the weapons were cleaned and loaded, and he showed Temp where he kept ammunition. He also taught her a signal, a specific whistle, that she should use if she saw anything suspicious while he was out working the ranch. But days passed, and the men didn't return. Life settled back into its new normal, though Tom found himself hyper-aware of Temp's safety in a way that went beyond employer and employee. 2 weeks after she'd arrived, they were working together to repair the chicken coop when Temp suddenly laughed. "What?" Tom asked, looking up from the board he was measuring. "I just realized I've been here 2 weeks and we still haven't discussed my wages," Temp said. "Some businesswoman I am." Tom set down his tools. "You're right. Name your price." $20 a month plus room and board, Temp said promptly. "That's fair for the work I'm doing." "30, Tom countered. Temp blinked. "That's too much." "Not for what you've done here." "Place looks better than it has in 3 years. I'm eating proper meals and you've been helping with ranch work too. 30's fair." Temp studied his face. "You're a good man, Tom Morrison." "Just trying to be fair, Temp Miller." They smiled at each other, and Tom felt that shift again, that sense of something growing between them that was more than just employer and employee. more than just friendship. That evening, after supper, they sat on the newly repaired porch watching the sun set over the mountains. It had become a habit, these quiet moments at the end of the day where they'd talk about everything and nothing. "Tell me about Sarah," Temp said suddenly. "If you want to, I mean. You don't have to." Tom was quiet for a moment, surprised to find that talking about Sarah didn't hurt the way it used to. She was small, blonde, always laughing, had this way of seeing the good in everything and everyone. "We met at a church social, got married 6 months later. She loved this place, had all kinds of plans for it. Like the flower garden, that was hers. She'd spend hours out there talking to the plants like they were her children." Tom smiled at the memory. "We wanted children, but it never happened. Then she got sick, and suddenly there was no more time." Temp reached over and squeezed his hand. The contact sent warmth through Tom's arm. "She'd be glad you're taking care of the garden again." "I'm not, though. That's all you." "We can share the credit," Temp said, her hand still in his. Tom looked at their joined hands, then up at Temp's face. In the fading light, her eyes looked almost silver. "Temp, I know," she said softly. "I feel it too." "It's too soon," Tom said, but he didn't pull his hand away. "You just got here. I'm your employer. It's not proper." "When is grief ever on a proper schedule?" Temp asked. "When is finding happiness ever improper? What if you're just grateful? What if I'm just lonely and you're the first person who's been here in years?" Temp turned to face him fully. "Do you really think that's all this is?" Tom looked at her, really looked at her, and knew the answer. "No." "Then maybe we don't overthink it," Temp said. "Maybe we just see where it goes." Tom squeezed her hand. "Maybe we do." They sat like that until the stars came out, hands clasped, not needing to say anything more. The next few weeks felt like spring itself had come to Tom's heart. He found himself smiling for no reason, singing while he worked, looking forward to each day in a way he hadn't since Sarah died. Temp seemed lighter too, laughing more, sometimes catching his eye across the yard and blushing. They were careful not to rush things, both aware of the delicacy of their situation. Tom continued to sleep in his room, Temp in hers. They didn't kiss or do anything that couldn't be seen by the whole world, but the connection between them grew stronger every day. One morning, about a month after Temp's arrival, Tom came in from morning chores to find her kneading bread dough with a troubled expression. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately. Temp looked up, startled. "Nothing, I was thinking about going into town today. I need some fabric and thread if I'm going to mend more clothes properly." "I'll take you," Tom said. "Need to pick up some supplies anyway." "That's not necessary. I can ride in alone." Tom shook his head. Those men from before, or others like them, could still be around. "I'd feel better going with you." Something in Temp's face softened. "All right. Thank you." They made the trip to Salt Lake City that afternoon. Tom noticed how people stared at them in town, how the whispers started as soon as they walked down the main street together. Small towns had long memories and loved gossip. At the general store, Mrs. Henderson, the proprietor's wife, greeted them with barely concealed curiosity. "Thomas Morrison, twice in 1 month. That's more than we've seen you in 2 years combined." "Been busy," Tom said neutrally. "Mrs. Henderson, this is Temperance Miller. She's working at my ranch, helping get things back in order." "How nice," Mrs. Henderson said, her eyes cataloging every detail of Temp's appearance. "And where did you say you're from, dear?" "Missouri originally," Temp answered politely. "I arrived in Salt Lake City about a month ago." Tom could see the calculations happening behind Mrs. Henderson's eyes. By tomorrow, the whole town would be speculating about the arrangement at his ranch. They completed their shopping and were loading supplies into the wagon when Reverend Matthews approached them. He was an older man, kind-faced, who had presided over Sarah's funeral. "Tom," he greeted warmly. "Good to see you in town, and this must be the young lady I've been hearing about." "News travels fast," Tom said dryly. "In a town this size, it always does." Reverend Matthews smiled at Temp. "I hope you're finding our community welcoming, Miss Miller." "Everyone's been very kind," Temp said diplomatically. "I'm glad to hear it." The Reverend paused, choosing his words carefully. "Tom, if you ever need anything, spiritual guidance or just someone to talk to, my door is always open." Tom understood what he wasn't saying. The Reverend, at least, wasn't condemning the situation, but he wanted Tom to know he was available if complications arose. "I appreciate that, Reverend. Thank you." On the ride home, Temp was quiet. "Finally," she said, "people are going to talk, you know." "Let them," Tom said firmly. "We're not doing anything wrong. I'm a single woman living in your house. In their eyes, that's something." Tom pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her. "Do you care what they think?" Temp met his eyes. "Only if it hurts you. The only thing that would hurt me is if you left." Tom reached over and took her hand. "I know this is complicated, I know people will gossip, but for the first time in 3 years I feel alive again. That's because of you." Temp's eyes shone with emotion. "I feel the same way. But Tom, we need to think about the future. I can't just be your housekeeper forever if we're feeling more than that." "I know," Tom said quietly. "I've been thinking about it too." They continued the journey in thoughtful silence. That evening, after supper, Tom asked Temp to sit with him on the porch. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began, his heart pounding. "About us, about the future, about what makes sense." Temp waited, her face calm but her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "It's only been a month," Tom continued. "I know that's not long. But I also know what I feel and I know what I want. Temp, I want you to stay here, not as my employee but as my wife." Temp's breath caught. "Tom." "I know I'm probably not the catch of the century," Tom said quickly. "I'm just a rancher with a modest spread and a past. But I can promise you I'll work hard, treat you right, and do everything in my power to make you happy. I love you, Temp. I didn't think I could love again, but I do." Tears were running down Temp's face. "You foolish, wonderful man. Don't you know I love you too?" "Then say yes," Tom said, pulling her hands into his. "Marry me, make this house a home again. Help me build a life worth living." "Yes," Temp said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, I'll marry you." Tom pulled her into his arms, kissing her for the first time. It was sweet and tentative and full of promise. When they broke apart, both were breathless. "When?" Temp asked. "Soon as you want," Tom replied. "Tomorrow if you'll have me," Temp laughed. "Maybe give me a little more time than that, but soon. Definitely soon." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Salt Lake City. Reverend Matthews performed the service, and a small group of townspeople attended, including Mrs. Henderson, who cried through the whole thing despite being the same woman who'd spent the past month speculating about impropriety. Temp wore a simple dress she'd sewn herself from fabric Tom had bought her, white with blue flowers embroidered around the hem. Tom wore his best suit, the one he'd worn to marry Sarah, and found he felt no guilt about it. Sarah would have wanted him to be happy. After the ceremony, they returned to the ranch as husband and wife. Tom carried Temp over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down in the main room of their home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Morrison," Tom said softly. "I like the sound of that," Temp replied, standing on her toes to kiss him. That night, for the first time, they shared Tom's room, now their room. Tom was nervous, gentle, careful. He'd been with Sarah, of course, but that had been years ago, and he felt almost like a young man again. Temp was patient and loving, meeting him with equal parts shyness and enthusiasm. Afterward, lying together in the darkness, Tom felt a contentment he'd thought lost forever. "What are you thinking?" Temp asked, her head on his chest. That I'm the luckiest man alive, Tom said honestly. That a month ago I was alone and half dead inside, and now I have you. I'm the lucky one, Temp said. I was covered in mud, homeless, with nothing to my name. You gave me everything. You gave me more, Tom insisted. You gave me a reason to care again. They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, the future stretching before them full of possibility. The following months passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Together, Tom and Temp continued transforming the ranch. They repainted the barn, replaced all the broken fences, and expanded the vegetable garden. The house became truly beautiful under Temp's care, with curtains she'd sewn herself, furniture she'd refinished, and small touches everywhere that made it feel like a real home. Tom's cattle operation improved too. With Temp's help managing the household side of things, he had more time to focus on the ranch itself. They hired 2 ranch hands, brothers named Jake and Samuel Turner, who lived in the bunkhouse and helped with the heavy work. The herd grew, and so did their prosperity. But the greatest joy came 6 months into their marriage when Temp announced she was expecting a child. Tom's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing and crying at once. "Are you sure?" he asked when he finally set her down. "As sure as I can be," Temp said, her hand on her still flat stomach. "Dr. Green confirmed it yesterday when I went into town." Tom knelt and pressed his face against her middle, his arms wrapped around her waist. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for this gift." "It's our gift," Temp corrected, running her fingers through his hair. "Ours together." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Tom became increasingly protective as Temp's belly grew. He tried to stop her from working too hard, which led to their first real argument. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," Temp said exasperatedly when Tom tried to take a basket of wet laundry from her hands. "Women have been doing this for thousands of years." "Not my wife carrying my child," Tom countered. "Let me help." "You can help by not treating me like an invalid," Temp said firmly. "I'll tell you if something's too much. Until then, trust me to know my own limits." Tom backed off, though he continued to hover. Temp bore it with patience, knowing it came from love rather than control. One evening in late autumn, as they sat by the fire with Temp knitting tiny clothes, Tom brought up something that had been on his mind. "Have you thought about names?" he asked. "Some," Temp admitted. "What do you think?" "I was thinking, if it's a boy, maybe Timothy." "And if it's a girl, Teresa." Temp smiled. "Both start with T like ours. I like that. Timothy Morrison and Teresa Morrison. Both sound good." "Which do you want?" Tom asked. "I want healthy," Temp said firmly. "Boy or girl doesn't matter as long as they're healthy." "Agreed," Tom said, reaching over to place his hand on her rounded belly. He felt a kick against his palm and his face lit up with wonder. "Did you feel that?" "I feel it all the time now," Temp laughed. "Your child has strong legs. Probably a boy then, going to be a rancher like his father. Or a strong girl who can rope and ride with the best of them," Temp countered. They continued their gentle teasing, but both felt the same underlying emotion. Hope and joy for the future they were building together. Winter came, and with it preparation for the baby's arrival. Tom converted a corner of their bedroom into a nursery space, building a beautiful cradle from oak. Temp sewed blankets and clothes, her hands never idle. The house stayed warm, supplies were laid in, and Dr. Green promised he'd come at the first sign of labor, weather permitting. The baby arrived on a snowy February morning in 1877. Tom had been up checking the animals when Temp's waters broke. He returned to find her calm but clearly in labor, timing contractions with impressive composure. "It's time," she said simply. "Send Jake for Dr. Green." Tom did. then spent the most terrifying day of his life waiting while Temp labored. Mrs. Henderson came to help, shooing Tom out of his own bedroom despite his protests. He paced the main room, jumped at every sound, and prayed more than he had since Sarah died. Finally, as the sun was setting, he heard it, the strong, angry cry of a newborn. Tom's legs nearly gave out with relief. Mrs. Henderson emerged a few minutes later, beaming. "You have a son, Mr. Morrison. A healthy, strong boy. Mother's doing fine, too." Tom pushed past her into the bedroom. Temp lay propped against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she'd made. She looked up as Tom entered, her smile brilliant. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Tom approached on shaking legs and looked down at the tiny red face of his child. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was making small snuffling sounds. As Tom watched, tiny eyes opened, revealing a deep blue that would probably change with time. "Timothy," Tom whispered, touching one impossibly small hand. The baby's fingers wrapped around his, grip surprisingly strong. "Hello, Timothy. He has your chin," Temp observed. "And I think he's going to have my nose, poor thing. He's perfect," Tom said fiercely. "You're both perfect." He leaned down and kissed Temp gently. "Thank you for this. Thank you for him, for us, for everything. Thank you for finding me covered in mud and taking a chance," Temp replied, her eyes shining with tears and joy. Tom spent that night in the chair beside the bed, unable to sleep, watching his wife and son rest. Every time Timothy made a sound, Tom's heart clenched with fierce, protective love. This was his family. His to love, his to protect, his to cherish. The early months with a newborn were exhausting but joyful. Tom discovered depths of patience he didn't know he possessed, walking the floor with a crying Timothy at 3 in the morning, learning to change nappies, marveling at every tiny milestone. Temp bloomed as a mother, though Tom could see the exhaustion in her face some days. He tried to help as much as he could, taking Timothy when Temp needed rest, doing more of the household chores so she could focus on the baby. "You're going to spoil me," Temp said one evening as Tom cooked supper while she fed Timothy. "That's the plan," Tom replied, stirring the pot. "You're doing the hardest job right now. Least I can do is keep us fed." "Some men wouldn't think helping with a baby or cooking was man's work," Temp observed. "Some men are fools," Tom said bluntly. "We're partners, Temp. That means we both do what needs doing." Spring came again, and with it the first anniversary of the day Tom had found Temp in the mud. They didn't realize it until Temp checked the calendar and burst into laughter. "What?" Tom asked, looking up from playing with Timothy on a blanket on the floor. "You know what today is?" Temp asked. "It's been exactly a year since my wagon overturned. A year since you found me covered in mud and offered me work." Tom sat back, counting in his head, and realized she was right. "Seems like longer. Seems like you've always been here." "And shorter," Temp added. "Like it just happened yesterday." "Best day of my life," Tom said firmly. "The day you stumbled into town looking like a swamp creature." Temp threw a towel at him, laughing. "Swamp creature, that's what you thought, at first," Tom admitted, ducking. "Then you cleaned up and turned out to be beautiful, and smart, and strong, and perfect." "Flatterer," Temp said, but she was smiling. "What should we do to celebrate? Survive another day as parents to this hungry little monster?" Tom suggested as Timothy began fussing. "That seems appropriate," Temp agreed, picking up their son. But that evening, after Timothy was asleep, Tom presented Temp with a gift, a locket on a gold chain. Inside were 2 small portraits he'd commissioned from a traveling artist who'd passed through town. One side showed Tom's face, the other showed Timothy's. "So you can keep us close to your heart," Tom said as he fastened it around her neck. Temp touched the locket, tears streaming down her face. "It's beautiful." Tom, I don't know what to say. Say you're happy, Tom suggested. I'm happy, Temp whispered. So happy. They made love that night with a tenderness born of deep familiarity and growing love, careful and quiet with Timothy sleeping nearby. The years began to pass, each one bringing new challenges and joys. Timothy grew into a bright, energetic boy with his mother's green eyes and his father's stubborn determination. The ranch continued to prosper under Tom and Temp's joint management. They added a chicken coop, expanded the barn, and bought more land from a neighboring rancher who was retiring. When Timothy was 3, Temp discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she gave birth to a daughter they named Teresa, called Tessa by everyone. Tessa was smaller than Timothy had been, with blonde hair that darkened to brown as she grew and blue eyes that stayed true. With 2 young children, life became chaotic but full. Tom often thought back to those dark years after Sarah's death and marveled at the transformation. His house rang with laughter and children's voices. His table was full at mealtimes. His bed was warm with Temp beside him. One challenge that arose was Timothy's curiosity about heaven and death. At 4 years old, he'd found an old photograph of Sarah that Tom had kept in a drawer. "Who's this?" Timothy asked, holding up the picture. Tom and Temp exchanged glances. They discussed how to handle this conversation but hadn't expected it quite so soon. "That's Sarah," Tom said gently, taking the photograph. "She was married to me before your mother." Timothy's face scrunched in confusion. "You had another wife." "I did," Tom confirmed. "She got very sick and went to heaven before you were born. I was very sad for a long time." "Are you still sad?" Timothy asked with the directness of a child. Tom pulled his son onto his lap. "Sometimes I'm a little sad when I remember her because she was a good person and I miss her. But mostly I'm happy now because I have you and your sister and your mother. Sarah would have liked knowing I'm happy again." "Did she live in our house?" "She did. She planted the flower garden your mother takes care of." Timothy processed this information. "I'm glad Mama takes care of her flowers. That's nice." "It is nice," Tom agreed, his voice thick with emotion. Temp, who'd been listening from the doorway with Tessa in her arms, came to sit beside them. "Your father's first wife was a special person, Timothy. She's part of what made this house a home. We honor her memory by being happy and taking care of the things she loved." Timothy nodded solemnly. "Okay. Can I go play now?" "Of course," Tom said, setting him down. Timothy ran off, the heavy topic already forgotten in the way of children. Tom looked at Temp gratefully. "Thank you for that, for understanding." "Sarah's part of your story," Temp said simply, "which makes her part of our story too. I'm not threatened by her memory, Tom. I'm grateful for the man you became and she helped shape that." Tom kissed her softly. "I don't know what I did to deserve you." "You took a chance on a woman covered in mud," Temp reminded him with a smile. As the children grew, they began helping more around the ranch. Timothy, at 6, was already learning to ride properly and helping Tom with simple chores. Tessa, at 3, followed her mother everywhere, trying to help with cooking and cleaning and gardening. One summer evening, when Timothy was 7 and Tessa was 4, the family was sitting on the porch watching fireflies when Timothy made an announcement. "I want to be a rancher like Papa when I grow up," he declared. "You now?" Tom asked, hiding his smile. "That's hard work, you know." "I know, but I like the animals, and I like being outside, and I like working with you." Tom felt his chest tighten with pride and love. "Well, if that's what you want, we'll make sure you learn everything you need to know." "What about you, Tessa?" Temp asked. "What do you want to be?" "A mama," Tessa said simply. "Like you." Temp laughed, pulling her daughter close. "Being a mother is wonderful, but you can be other things too." "You can be anything you want." "But I want to be like you," Tessa insisted. Tom reached over and squeezed Temp's hand. She squeezed back, both of them silently acknowledging the beauty of this moment, this life they'd built together. When Timothy was 8, a drought hit the region. Water became scarce, and ranchers throughout the territory struggled. Tom worked longer hours, moving cattle to areas where grass still grew, rationing water, making hard decisions about which animals to sell and which to keep. Temp did her part too, cutting back on household water use, letting the garden go to save water for drinking and cooking, finding creative ways to stretch their food supplies. The children, sensing the tension, became quieter, more helpful. One night, Tom came in late after another grueling day to find Temp sitting at the kitchen table, going over their accounts by lamplight. "We're going to make it through this," she said without preamble. "It'll be tight, but we have enough saved. We just need the rains to come." Tom sat heavily in the chair across from her. "I keep thinking I should have seen this coming, prepared better." "Nobody can predict drought," Temp said firmly. "We're better off than many. We have the reserve feed we put up last year, we have good water rights to the creek, and we have each other. That's more than a lot of people have." "How are you always so strong?" Tom asked, reaching across the table for her hand. "Because you're strong when I'm weak," Temp replied. "That's how marriage works. We take turns holding each other up." The drought broke in late summer with storms that were almost frightening in their intensity. But when the rain came, Tom stood in it, face turned to the sky, laughing with relief. Timothy and Tessa ran outside to join him, dancing in the downpour, while Temp watched from the porch, smiling. That year, despite the drought, they made it through without serious loss. It was a testament to Tom's careful management and Temp's thrifty household running. More than that, it proved to both of them that their partnership could withstand hardship. The years continued to roll by, each one adding another layer to their shared life. They celebrated birthdays and Christmases, survived childhood illnesses and minor injuries, welcomed new animals and mourned old ones. When Temp was 30 and Tom was 33, they were surprised by another pregnancy. Temp gave birth to twin boys they named Thomas Jr., called TJ and Tyler. The twins were a handful, identical in appearance but different in temperament. TJ was calm and thoughtful, while Tyler was adventurous and mischievous. With 4 children, the house was full to bursting with noise and life. Timothy, now 12, helped his father even more on the ranch. Tessa, at 9, was learning to sew from her mother and showing real talent for it. The twins kept everyone on their toes with their endless energy and creative destruction. One evening, after finally getting all 4 children to bed, Tom and Temp collapsed on the porch, exhausted but content. "Remember when we thought one baby was hard?" Temp asked, laughing softly. "Remember when we thought running the ranch alone was hard?" Tom countered. "We didn't know what hard was." "Would you change anything?" Temp asked, turning to look at him. Tom met her eyes, seeing the laugh lines that had formed around them, the few silver threads in her dark hair, the familiar beloved face he'd been waking up to for over a decade. "Not one single thing. You." "Maybe I would have avoided that mud puddle," Temp said thoughtfully. "Or maybe not. Maybe that mud puddle was exactly where I needed to be to find you." "I think about that day sometimes," Tom admitted. "How close I came to not stopping in town that day. I'd already gotten my supplies, but I'd forgotten nails. If I hadn't forgotten nails, I wouldn't have been on that porch. I wouldn't have seen you." "Then I believe in divine nails," Temp said solemnly. They looked at each other and burst into laughter. These moments of quiet connection, stolen between the chaos of family life, were precious to both of them. They'd learned over the years that marriage wasn't just the big romantic gestures, but these small, everyday choices to love and support each other. As the children grew older, They each developed distinct personalities and interests. Timothy remained devoted to ranching and spent every free moment with his father, learning the trade. Tessa, along with her sewing, developed a love of reading and would often read stories to her younger brothers. TJ showed an unexpected aptitude for numbers and liked helping his mother with the ranch accounts. Tyler was the adventurer, always climbing trees, exploring the furthest corners of the property, collecting interesting rocks and feathers and anything else that caught his eye. Tom and Temp supported each child's individual interests while teaching them all the value of hard work and family. Evenings around the dinner table were lively affairs, with everyone sharing their day's adventures and misadventures. One significant event occurred when Timothy was 15. He'd been helping Tom move cattle when rustlers struck, running off about 20 head. Tom and Timothy gave chase along with Jake and Samuel, the ranch hands who were now practically family after so many years. They tracked the rustlers to a box canyon and confronted them. Tom recognized the leader, the scarred man from years ago who'd stopped by the ranch demanding food and water. Should have been more hospitable, the man sneered when he realized he was cornered. Should have stayed honest, Tom replied evenly. His gun was drawn but pointed at the ground. The cattle are mine. Let them go and ride on and we'll call it done. The tension stretched tight as a wire. Tom was acutely aware of Timothy beside him, armed but too young to be in this situation. He needed to end this without violence. The scarred man looked at Tom's small group, then at his own companions. Whatever he saw in Tom's face must have convinced him because he nodded slowly. "We're taking our horses," he said. "Cattle ain't worth dying over." "Fair enough," Tom agreed. The rustlers mounted up and rode out, leaving the cattle behind. Tom waited until they were out of sight before holstering his weapon. "Why didn't we stop them?" Timothy asked, confused. "They're criminals." "Because I had my son with me and no amount of cattle is worth risking your life," Tom said firmly. "We got our animals back and nobody got hurt. That's a win in my book." Timothy thought about this as they drove the cattle home. That evening, Tom found him on the porch, clearly troubled. "What's bothering you?" Tom asked, sitting beside his son. "I thought I'd be more brave," Timothy admitted. "When those men had our cattle, I was scared." "Being scared doesn't mean you're not brave," Tom said. "Being brave means doing what needs to be done even when you're scared." "You stood beside me. You were ready to help if needed. That's all I could ask." "Really? Really?" Tom put his arm around Timothy's shoulders. "Son, you don't ever have to prove yourself to me. You're already everything I could hope for." Timothy leaned into his father's embrace and they sat together watching the sunset. When Tom told Temp about the incident that night, she went pale. "You could have been killed," she said, her voice shaking. "Both of you." "But we weren't," Tom said gently, pulling her into his arms. "We're fine. Everyone's fine. This time," Temp said into his chest. "Tom, what if next time there's always a next time?" Tom interrupted softly. "That's life, especially out here. All we can do is be careful, be smart, and come home to each other every night." Temp pulled back to look at him. "Promise me you'll always come home." "I promise to do everything in my power to come home to you, every single time," Tom said, knowing it was the most honest answer he could give. As the 1880s arrived, changes came to the territory. The railroad was expanding, bringing more people and commerce. Salt Lake City was growing rapidly. More ranches were being established, making the open range more crowded. Tom and Temp discussed expanding their own operation or staying as they were. In the end, they decided they had enough. Their ranch was successful but manageable, allowing Tom to be present for his family rather than constantly expanding and chasing more profit. "We have enough," Temp said during one of these discussions. Enough land, enough cattle, enough income. I'd rather have you home for dinner than have twice the cattle and see you half as much. Tom agreed wholeheartedly. He'd learned the hard way, during his years alone, that success meant nothing without people to share it with. Timothy was 17, Tessa 14, and the twins were 9 when Tom and Temp sat all 4 children down for a serious conversation. "Your mother and I want to talk about the future," Tom began. "Specifically, the future of this ranch." The children listened attentively, even Tyler managing to sit still. "Timothy, we know you want a ranch. When you're ready, we want to make you a full partner in this operation, teach you everything about the business side, not just the working side." Timothy's face lit up. "Really?" "Really," Tom confirmed. "Tessa, we know your heart is in sewing and design. We'd like to help you open a dress shop in town if that's what you want." Tessa's eyes went wide. "My own shop, eventually," Temp said, smiling. "You'd need more training first, maybe an apprenticeship. But yes, that's our hope for you if it's what you want. TJ, Tyler, you're younger, so you have time to figure out what you want," Tom continued. "But know that you'll each get a fair inheritance when the time comes, whether that's land, money, or help starting whatever you choose to do. We're telling you this now because we want you to know you're secure," Temp added. "Your father and I built this ranch together, and we want it to benefit all of you." That night, after the children had gone to bed still excitedly discussing their futures, Tom pulled Temp close. "We did good," he said softly. "Look at them, look at what we built." "We did," Temp agreed. 4 healthy, happy children, a successful ranch, a good life." "All because you fell in a mud puddle," Tom teased. Temp elbowed him gently. "All because you stopped to help." "Best decision I ever made," Tom said, kissing her forehead. The years continued their steady march. Timothy took on more responsibility at the ranch, proving himself capable and thoughtful. Tessa did indeed apprentice with a seamstress in town and showed real talent. The twins grew tall and strong, TJ following Timothy's footsteps into ranching while Tyler talked about becoming a surveyor and exploring the expanding West. Tom and Temp aged gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year. The passion of their early days mellowed into something steadier but no less profound. They knew each other completely, could communicate with a glance, and still found joy in each other's company. One evening, when Tom was 45 and Temp was 42, they were sitting in their customary spot on the porch. The children were grown or nearly so. The ranch was running smoothly. Life was good. "You ever think about that day?" Temp asked suddenly. "The day you found me?" "All the time," Tom admitted. "Why?" "I was thinking about how different my life would be if your wagon had gone down a different street, if you'd been looking the other way, if you'd decided I was too much trouble to help." "I never thought you were trouble," Tom said. "Well, maybe a little trouble, but the good kind," Temp laughed. "I was a mess." "You were beautiful," Tom corrected. "Muddy but beautiful and strong and proud even when you had nothing." "I had hope," Temp said softly. "That's what I had, hope that things would get better." "Did they?" Tom asked, even though he knew the answer. "They got better than I ever dreamed," Temp said, turning to face him. "Tom Morrison, you gave me everything. A home, a family, a purpose, love. You filled my soul." "Funny," Tom said, pulling her close. "I was going to say the same thing about you. You came into my life when I was just existing, not living. You cleaned my house, cleaned my soul, filled all the empty spaces. You made me want to live again." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the stars come out over their ranch, their home, the life they'd built together from mud and loneliness and unexpected love. Timothy brought home a young woman he was courting when he was 20, a rancher's daughter named Sarah, which gave both Tom and Temp a moment of surprised emotion. But young Sarah was nothing like Tom's first wife, being tall and outspoken and able to ride and rope as well as any man. "I know it's the same name," Timothy said privately to his parents. "Does it bother you?" "Not at all," Tom said honestly. "If you love her, the name doesn't matter." "We do love her," Temp added. "She's perfect for you." Timothy and Sarah married the following year, and Timothy brought his bride to live at the ranch. Tom had built them a small house on the property, giving them independence while keeping them close. It was strange but wonderful to watch his son start his own family, to see the cycle continuing. Tessa opened her dress shop in town when she was 21, making a name for herself with her beautiful, practical designs. She married a teacher named Martin Lewis when she was 23, a quiet man who balanced her creative nature with his steady temperament. TJ stayed on the ranch with Timothy, the two of them working alongside Tom to keep the operation running. Tyler, true to his word, became a surveyor and traveled throughout the territory, sending letters home full of adventure and sketches of the places he'd seen. Tom was 50 when he had his first grandchild, Timothy and Sarah's son, whom they named Thomas Morrison Roman III. Holding his grandson for the first time, Tom felt the circle of life complete itself in the most profound way. "Your great-grandson," Temp said softly, standing beside him as he held the baby. "Can you believe it?" "I can barely believe I have a grandson," Tom admitted. "Somewhere along the way we got old. We got blessed," Temp corrected. "Look at everything we have." Tom looked around the room. Timothy and Sarah beaming at their son. Tessa and Martin having made the trip from town to meet the new arrival. TJ bouncing with excitement to be an uncle. Even Tyler had timed his visit home to coincide with the birth. "You're right," Tom said. "We're blessed beyond measure." More grandchildren followed. Timothy and Sarah had 3 children in total. Tessa and Martin had 2. TJ married a woman from town and started his own family. Even Tyler eventually settled down with a woman he met on his travels, bringing her home to meet the family. Tom and Temp settled into the role of grandparents with joy. Their house became the gathering place for the extended family, especially at holidays and special occasions. Temp cooked enormous meals while Tom played with the grandchildren, teaching them to ride and rope and love the land as he did. One Christmas, when Tom was 55 and the house was bursting with children and grandchildren, he pulled Temp aside into their bedroom for a moment of quiet. "Happy?" he asked, knowing the answer but wanting to hear it. "Happier than I knew was possible," Temp replied. "You?" "Same." Tom kissed her softly. "Thank you for saying yes to a lonely cowboy 20-some years ago." "Thank you for asking a muddy woman," Temp replied. "Best decision I ever made." They returned to the chaos of their family, hand in hand, hearts full. As Tom moved into his 60s, he gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, letting Timothy and TJ take over while he served as advisor and consultant. It was a difficult transition at first, admitting he couldn't do everything he used to, but Temp was there to help him through it. "You built something that will last," she reminded him when he struggled with feeling useless. "Now you get to enjoy watching it thrive." Tom found new purpose in his grandchildren, in his time with Temp, in the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. He took up woodworking in his spare time, building toys for the grandchildren and furniture for whoever needed it. Temp continued to manage the household, though with less intensity than before. She taught her daughters and daughters-in-law her recipes and techniques, passing on knowledge and tradition. She kept her flower garden beautiful, a living memorial to Sarah that had become something more a symbol of growth and renewal and life continuing. One summer evening, when Tom was 68 and Temp was 65, they took a rare trip alone, riding out to the spot where Tom had first established his ranch all those decades ago. The view was the same, the mountains still majestic in the distance, but everything else had changed. Where there had been a simple cabin, there was now a beautiful house. Where there had been empty pastures, there were well-maintained fences and healthy cattle. Where there had been loneliness, there was now a thriving family legacy. "We did good," Tom said, echoing words he'd spoken many times over the years. "We did," Temp agreed. "Tom, I want you to know something." "What's that?" "Every single day of our marriage has been a gift. Even the hard days, even the sad days, all of it has been worth it because I spent it with you." Tom felt tears prick his eyes. "I love you, Temperance Morrison. I've loved you from the moment you drank from my canteen with mud all over your face. I loved you from the moment you offered me honest work and respect when I had nothing," Temp replied. "You saw me when I was invisible. You saved me." "We saved each other," Tom corrected, pulling her into his arms. They stood there as the sun set. Two people who'd found each other against all odds and built a life beyond their wildest dreams. Tom lived to see his 70th birthday, surrounded by his wife, 4 children, 12 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. It was a loud, chaotic, joyful celebration that left him exhausted and happier than he'd ever been. "This is what heaven must be like," he told Temp that night as they prepared for bed. "Surrounded by love." "Don't talk about heaven yet," Temp chided. "You're not going anywhere for a long time." "Not planning on it," Tom assured her. "Still have too much to do here." They fell asleep as they had for 42 years, wrapped in each other's arms. Tom passed away peacefully 5 years later at 75 with Temp holding his hand. He'd lived a full, rich life, longer than many men of his era. His last words were, "Thank you for the mud puddle." Temp understood. She smiled through her tears and kissed his forehead. "Thank you for stopping to help." The funeral was attended by what seemed like half the territory. Tom had been respected as a fair rancher, a good neighbor, and a devoted family man. But for Temp, the loss was profound. They'd been married for 44 years, together for 45. Half her life had been spent with this man. Her children worried about her, but Temp was stronger than they knew. She grieved, certainly, but she also celebrated the incredible life they'd shared. She told stories to her grandchildren about their grandfather, keeping his memory alive and vibrant. "He was covered in trail dust the first time I saw him," she'd tell them. "And I was covered in mud. We were quite a pair." The grandchildren loved these stories, begging to hear them again and again. Temp lived another 8 years, staying active and involved with the ranch and her family. She got to see Timothy Morrison, Roman III, marry and start his own family, making her a great-great-grandmother. She saw the ranch continue to thrive under Timothy and TJ's management. She saw all her children happy and successful. On a warm spring evening, much like the evening Tom had first seen her stumbling down the street in Salt Lake City, Temp passed away in her sleep. She was 83 years old. Her last thoughts were of Tom, of their life together, of the incredible journey that had started with a mud puddle and a kind stranger. They buried her beside Tom, under a large oak tree on a hill overlooking the ranch. The headstone read, "Temperance Morrison, beloved wife, mother, grandmother." She filled our souls. The ranch continued under the family's care, passing from Timothy to his children and beyond. The story of Tom and Temp became family legend, told and retold at gatherings. The house they'd built and filled with love remained the heart of the family for generations. And in Sarah's flower garden, now tended by great-great-grandchildren who never knew either woman, flowers bloomed every spring, a testament to love, resilience, and the incredible things that can grow from the smallest acts of kindness. The story of the lonely cowboy and the woman covered in mud became a love story for the ages, proving that sometimes the best things in life come from the unexpected moments, the chances we take, and the hearts we open even when we think we have nothing left to give.